This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.
I've spent a professional lifetime working on national security issues, and I've never seen our nation so threatened, not just by foreign actors now, but from a movement within, that threatens us as a constitutional republic.
Welcome to America Daily. I'm Jessica Beatty. The Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson has interviewed a second whistleblower with alleged knowledge about President Trump's call with Ukraine's leader. Democrats led the impeachment inquiry over the call. The first whistleblower suggested in a complaint that President Trump pressured Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden. The whistleblower alleges it's a violation of campaign finance law. The Justice Department determined no further action was necessary after reviewing the complaint. The day after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced the impeachment inquiry, the White House released a transcript of the call. There were several factual contradictions between the complaint and the transcript, and the majority of the complaint was based on secondhand information. The whistleblower also failed to inform the Inspector General's office that they had already spoken to Democratic staff on the House Intelligence Committee. Both whistleblowers are members of the intelligence community. In previous episodes, we discussed how the intelligence community has become politicized. Today, we welcome back Dr. Peter Pry. Dr. Pry is the Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He served in the CIA and has spent a professional lifetime working on national security issues. Today, we discuss whether or not the impeachment inquiry is justified, whether we can blame all our problems today on ideological subversion, and what threat China's new weapons pose to the United States. Dr. Pry, thanks so much for joining us. On September 24th, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that they initiated impeachment proceedings against President Trump, and they're basing it on the Ukraine phone call. So they're accusing the president of committing treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's according to constitutional scholars, it's not legal. It's not a legal impeachment inquiry. President Trump is absolutely right to refuse the subpoenas that are coming out of this so-called impeachment inquiries because you're supposed to hold a vote. The whole of the Congress is supposed to vote on whether you can proceed with impeachment or not. And that has, when it comes to presidential impeachments, that's always been the precedent. And precedents are binding on profound matters like impeachment. Moreover, the alleged high crimes and misdemeanors, it's transparently false, I think, to anybody, who looks at the transcript and looks what transpired. Trump was perfectly right to declassify the transcript of the conversation, which demonstrates, that nothing illegal, illicit happened. Ironically, the Democrats are charging President Trump with a very, I won't call that illegal wrongdoing because it's not illegal even to reach out to foreign actors to help you with your elections. That's not what Trump did. That's what they're accusing him of having done. What one can argue that it's unethical, but that's what they did. That's what they did with the Steele dossier. That's what they did with the investigation that resulted in the Mueller probe against him. They were singularly uninterested in real acts of criminality that were committed by the Clintons. Bill Clinton when he was president, and then Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. And they basically sold their offices for millions of dollars in contributions to the Bill and Hillary Foundation. And it's obvious that the only reason people were making such contributions, foreign governments were making such contributions, was for influence, so that they would use their offices as President and Secretary of State to affect U.S. foreign policy. That is illegal, and the Democrats are completely uninterested in that. So, there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy here. And I guess the thing that's most worrisome to me is I really think one could argue, and I have argued in print, that I think it was September 24th when she announced, I might be mistaken about the date, when Nancy Pelosi announced the impeachment inquiry, and she had the foul hypocrisy to quote Benjamin Franklin. This about you have a republic, madam, if you can keep it, which refers to an incident that happened at the end of the Constitutional Convention when Benjamin Franklin was coming out of Independence Hall, and a lady asked him, "Well, doctor, do we have a republic or monarchy?" And Franklin said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And so she is implying that they have to do this in order to keep our republic. But what in fact she's doing is shredding the Constitution herself. And I think you could date the fall of our constitutional republic. I hope future historians don't have to do this, but the fall of our constitutional republic might be dated to the day that Nancy Pelosi announced this unconstitutional, illegal impeachment inquiry against President Trump. Because in order to have a healthy, a working constitutional republic, you need everybody. Both major political parties have got to respect the Constitution and the laws. If they both don't respect the Constitution and the laws, you don't have a constitutional republic anymore. What we've got, I think she took us over the Rubicon of constitutionalism, and we're now in a cold civil war, struggling for what the future of the country is going to be. I think that Pelosi and the Democrat Party have become, over the years, a totalitarian movement. And you've got one party, the Republicans, that do believe in constitutionalism, although they have not been very good at defending it over the years. They've been very weak. And that weakness has encouraged the growth of aggression, an aggressive totalitarianism on the part of the Democrats, because the Republicans have never effectively resisted their grab for power on a whole area of the front, so that they've taken over our universities, the courts, all the branches of the federal government, and the mainstream media too. So we're now on the threshold of transitioning into a totalitarian system if the Democrats win the next elections, and I blame the Republicans in part because they've been so ineffective at defending the Constitution. They're even now they are curled up in the fetal position. Some of them are protesting, but they're not using the leadership, especially, is curled up in the fetal position. And some of them, like Mitt Romney on the Republican side, are actually with the Democrats. So those are my thoughts on the impeachment inquiry, which in all my years, I've spent a professional lifetime, working on national security issues, and I've never seen our nation so threatened by, not just by foreign actors now, but from a movement within, that threatens us as a constitutional republic.
Coming up, can we blame all our problems today on the Soviets? In an interview from over 30 years ago, KGB defector Yuri Bezmenyov said the KGB's main emphasis was on ideological subversion or psychological warfare. He said it was a slow process that started with exposing one generation of children to the ideology of the enemy, which in the case of the KGB would have been Marxism-Leninism. I asked Dr. Pry how the Soviet Union's techniques of ideological subversion have affected our country today. Here's what he had to say.
Well, yes, you're right. And there are many intellectuals who I respect, like Jared Nyquist and Mark Schneider, who would wholly agree with that and would point to Soviet and then Russian intelligence operations, that undermined our democracy, ideological operations. And some of them are almost in plain sight. Michael Horowitz, and Diana West have written excellent books, on this ideological warfare, and they make very compelling case how the Soviets and the Russians penetrated our universities, our educational institutions, and that's how we ended up with this totalitarian socialist movement that now has captured the Democrat Party. So I don't dismiss it. I think it's those are extremely valid points that have been ignored by the liberal mainstream media because their own values for their belief in large government to solve everything is consistent, with socialism, and they didn't want to be. They didn't want to advertise the works of Horowitz and Diana West, which would in effect be admitting or making them vulnerable to the charge that basically they're closet socialists, and that's where they're really going. And now they're not even closet socialists. Now they're out of the closet and they're full-blown socialists. But excuse me. But while I do think that Horowitz and Diana West and Jared Nyquist are all right about that, I don't entirely accept that thesis. I'm not sure that if the Russians and their intelligence operations chiefly responsible for the fact that we've gone this way. If they had never made the attempt to turn us toward socialism, would we have done it on our own? What I'm thinking of, as a person who was originally trained as a historian, I'm thinking of Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian Wars. Where Athens, the brilliant shining democracy that was Athens, the Athens of Socrates and the brilliant playwrights, and the Athens that had the most powerful navy in the Mediterranean world and was the head of the most powerful military alliance, the Delian League. How Athens went down to defeat to Sparta, the totalitarian power of its day, and how that happened. And democracies, in the case of Athens, one of the flaws in democracies is they are so argumentative, and there is a tendency, especially when they're on the verge of crisis and they're demagoguery, for example. You can clearly see it in the Peloponnesian Wars. And Thucydides, who's a general, fighting on the side of the Athenians, is critical of these flaws in the Athenian democracy, the tendency toward demagoguery. In other words, some strong man will come up and tell you that things are much worse than they really are, and try to panic people into giving him all power so that they would make him temporarily a dictator. Or there'll be some crisis, like a defeat in a naval battle, and then the people will panic over that real crisis and be willing to give up their freedoms for security. The Athenians needed no help from the Spartans to give up their freedom and be defeated in the Peloponnesian War, because there are inherent weaknesses in the democratic system. The democratic system is designed, democracies and republics are designed to sort of maximize freedom and prosperity for people who are living in peace. Okay? They're not maximized for fighting wars. And that's why, historically, democratic systems have usually lost. There's only been, 3 cases of democracies, or call it constitutional republics, which is what we are in history. One was Athens that went down to defeat Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. The other one was the Roman Republic, which did last 500 years, but it ended up through civil wars, turning into an imperial dictatorship under the Caesars. And then there's us. We've lasted 200 years, which really isn't long in historical terms. If you look at the Assyrian Empire, they lasted thousands and thousands of years. They were a totalitarian state that existed in the Bronze Age, that conquered the entire known world, for periods lasting centuries. And there are other such examples like that. We're kind of systems that exist for the people, and where people enjoy freedoms such as we have, are rare in history. So I wonder if my concern about putting all the emphasis on the Soviets are to blame for our predilection for this internal problem we have with socialists and the like. I'm afraid that might be a distraction, that might become an excuse for people not facing up to the reality that even in the absence of efforts by the Chinese and the Russians to undermine our system through ideological warfare, we're entirely capable ourselves, just because of the inherent weaknesses of democratic systems and constitutional republics. We're entirely capable of undermining ourselves and going the way of Athens. And I think it's a combination of those factors, external influence as well as the internal weaknesses of, from a national security standpoint, of democratic and constitutional republics that we are seeing before our eyes. And the founders knew that, by the way. That's what Franklin meant when he said to the lady in Philadelphia, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it," because the founders were close scholars and students of ancient history. And they thought, Lincoln said, that no great power from Europe would be able to step across the Atlantic Ocean in a contest of 1,000 years and set its foot upon the Appalachians or take a drink out of the Ohio. That the author of our destruction, if it happens, will be ourselves. Now, Lincoln was wrong. He's wrong today about his assertion, because even North Korea can reach across the Pacific Ocean and strike us. But what he meant about us being the enemy ourselves is still true, and that's what the founders were concerned about. That the factionalism, the weakness of democratic and constitutional republics, the faction and demagoguery, and that this could be so severe that we end up hating each other more than we fear our enemies. The founders were very much afraid of that, and thought, and that's why they put checks and balances into our system, so that a demagogue wouldn't find it very difficult, to take control of our country. The system is designed to prevent one party from becoming a totalitarian party, and the assumption was, of course, that there would be good people around to resist that totalitarian movement. But we've arrived at a place where, the Republicans haven't been doing their job very effectively for decades, letting the Democrat Party, move in this direction of totalitarianism by taking over control of the media, of the universities, of the judicial system, and now we're on the threshold of possibly losing our constitutional republic because they have been asleep at the wheel. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Coming up, China's newest weapons and what it means for the United States. So on October 1st, the Chinese Communist Party celebrated its 70th anniversary of coming to power. They had a huge military parade that looked like something out of North Korea, and our China experts said they showcased some new weapons during the parade. So my question is this: what kind of threat does China pose to the United States now compared to other countries like Russia or North Korea or Iran?
I think the military parade on October 1st, was a turning point in the way we have to assess the China threat. They had on display the DF-41 ICBM, which is a ICBM capable of striking anywhere in the United States, really anywhere in the world, and can deliver 10 warheads. A single missile can deliver 10 warheads with great accuracy to within 450 feet or closer to a target. That means with one weapon, you could destroy an American missile silo, or the hardest targets in the United States. And I think my friend Michael Pillsbury said that they displayed 90 of these. I saw that. I was surprised that they had so many on the parade, but it looks like they may have displayed the entire inventory of DF-41s. If they didn't, they probably have many more hidden. But if they had 90 DF-41s, that's twice as many as you need to do a disarming first strike against the United States. There's only about 500 targets in the United States for a nuclear, what we call a counterforce war. It's not where you're interested in attacking cities, but you're interested in winning the war by a disarming strike against the enemy's retaliatory capabilities. You launch a disarming strike, you take out the ICBMs, you take out the bombers on their bases, you take out the ballistic missile submarines that are in port, you take out key command and control nodes. You can do that with about 500 warheads, actually fewer than 500 warheads. And if they paraded 90 DF-41s, that's 900 warheads, twice what you need to do a disarming first strike. So that means that China is right up there. Up until that point, Russia was the only other actor that could do a classical disarming first strike. Now China can do it too. It can do the classical disarming first strike. And here's an example. This is an example of what happened on October 1st with China. Our China experts in the State Department and even in the Department of Defense, in a lot of places, and certainly in academia, are always trying to put the best face on what the Chinese are doing, especially when it comes to the nuclear threat. They're far more afraid of America building up its nuclear capabilities to deter China because they have a twisted understanding of American history, and they see us as being responsible. And so, they're always trying to play down the emerging China threat. Now with all of these DF-41s being deployed, it's clearly an offensive first strike weapon, but they don't want to wake up and smell the coffee and admit that. They'd like to think that today is just the same as it was yesterday, but that's not the case. In terms of the numbers, in terms of strategic military calculations, October 1st was a big turning point. They displayed strategic nuclear capabilities they didn't have before. And that's just from one missile, the DF-41. They had other missiles on display that we don't even have counterparts to. They've got these hypersonic missiles as well, which arguably are even more dangerous than the DF-41 because they're even more accurate. And one of the other things I think, and I wish people would note, that I would hope Americans might, if they reflected a little bit, that it might sober them up and make them wake up and smell the coffee. I think these military parades that brandish weapons of mass destruction, nuclear missiles, that are regularly conducted by China, by Russia, by North Korea, it's interesting that these things are practically unique to these totalitarian states. The United States has never conducted such a parade. We've never paraded our Minuteman III missile down Pennsylvania Avenue. The Brits have never done it. The French have never paraded their tactical nuclear missiles down the Champs-Élysées. Why is that? That's because we're democracies and constitutional republics. And we have a bias against weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons of mass destruction, because they threaten the people. They threaten the people in the way no other weapon can. And our whole legitimacy derives from the people. So people like myself, who are longtime students and scholars of military strategy, have been constantly frustrated all our lives that we can't get the American people or the French people or the British people to be enthusiastic, just about supporting modernization of nuclear weapons. It's always a terrible fight. And that's because the totalitarian states have got us at a ideological disadvantage when it comes to these weapon systems. We need them to deter a World War III. We need them, and the American people have understood that well enough so that at least in the past, during the Cold War, we were able to keep up in the arms race. We are actually winning the arms race under Ronald Reagan, which is why we ended up winning the Cold War. But in the aftermath of the Cold War, there seems to be a lack of awareness that the new Cold War is back. And the repugnance that the average American has for nuclear missiles and nuclear weapons is so great that even in the face of this overwhelming threat from Russia and China and North Korea, we're having a hard time convincing the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the usual suspects that America does need to rearm. It needs to be able to have modernized nuclear weapons and missiles that are capable of responding proportionally and doing the same kind of damage to the bad guys that they can do to us. The object being not to use those weapons, but to deter their use so that a nuclear war doesn't have to be fought and is never fought. So that's why we need to be prepared, because the nuclear weapons are the most powerful piece on the geostrategic chessboard, and we dare not allow ourselves to become inferior in that piece, or we're inviting aggression by the totalitarian powers.
Well, Dr. Pry, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you again, Jessica.
Do you have any topics you'd like us to cover? You can let us know on our Facebook page at AD Top Story of the Day. Once again, I'm Jessica Beatty. Thanks for listening to America Daily.
This is America Daily, bringing you the best in truthful news updates and in-depth reports happening now.